One of gun control's multitudinous lamentations against the NRA is that it used to be a moderate, reasonable sportsman's association,
until it spontaneously transformed into a radicalized monster,
all the while failing to recognize their hand in the creation of this monster. Progressivism's relationship with history is, well, rather complicated. It gets so excitable about new stuff just because it's new that it either disregards history, boring, or it tries to put a new spin on an historical event or figure.
Did you know Jesus was a Marxist? It's true, comrade.
For example, in trying to fault the West for Islamic terrorism, progressives will often point to the Crusades, saying that they all started in 1095 with the proclamation of an old white Christian guy to wage an unprovoked war of imperialist expansionism against peaceful brown people, all the while ignoring the previous 400 years of wars of Islamic expansionism waged against other brown people and other people different from them. So it could be said of the Crusades, at least in part, that they were Europe's way of saying, we've had enough of your crap and we're going to do something about it. Point being, progressives don't like telling the whole story because the parts they leave out tend to wreck their narrative. Likewise, progressivism, as expressed through the gun control movement, likes to paint a Xenified picture of the National Rifle Association's history, saying that up until a certain convention in 1977, it was a meek and mild hunting and gun safety organization, up until, without provocation, it transformed into a monstrous army of crusaders for gun rights zealotry. This turning point is mentioned by James Atwood in his book Fundamentalism, and the Trace likes to mention it every now and then. Except that this change was not unprovoked, and even Vox hints at this in a 2017 article, though it doesn't go into much detail about it. Think of it as there is some important history leading up to that convention in 1977 that gun control advocates like to leave out. And here's what's missing. Now, as you may already know, the NRA was founded in the aftermath of the Civil War by two Union officers who were dismayed with the lack of marksmanship they saw in their troops during the course of the war. And so they started this organization in the interest of improving the citizenry's competency with guns. Stop. Get that? They were looking to serve the Second Amendment's goals for providing for the security of a free state by encouraging the citizenry to train with firearms, which is what being well regulated is really all about, despite gun control's attempts to reimagine that phrase. Now, let me give gun control propagandists some credit in saying that yes, the NRA was largely apolitical during most of its history. However, in the political upheavals of the 1960s, the NRA found itself caught up in those events as well, and that drug it out of the shadows. There were high-profile political assassinations. Armed marches took place by people who were demonstrating their First Amendment rights along with their Second Amendment rights to defend their First Amendment rights. And David Kopel, in his History of the Gun Control Movement in the 20th Century, states that among the intelligentsia, there was a notion being entertained that the Second Amendment was a collective right rather than an individual right. During this time, the NRA seemed rather undecided as to what it should do, because on the one hand, it granted a charter to Robert F. Williams to set up a chapter in Monroe County, North Carolina, which he used to train black folk to defend their neighborhoods against violent attacks by the Ku Klux Klan. Then on the other hand, it supported California Governor Ronald Reagan's Mulford Act, which banned the open carry of firearms, done in response to openly armed Black Panthers. And it proved itself rather squishy in the face of the 1968 Gun Control Act. Well, the leadership was squishy. They hid their support for the GCA from their membership while openly condemning gun control. And this, if anything, was the turning point for the NRA. Then the 70s came, and that decade saw the formation of two major gun control organizations, one of which was the National Coalition to Ban Handguns, and the other was the National Council to Control Handguns. Both formed in 1974. But this one would later rename itself to the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, Sound familiar? And this one would rename itself to Handgun Control Incorporated and later rename itself to the Brady Campaign. These two were allied for a brief time, sharing the common goals of licensing firearms ownership, registering firearms, and banning handguns from private ownership. They only differed on how fast they wanted these goals to happen. The National Coalition favored a more aggressive, quick approach, whereas the National Council preferred a more gradual, slower approach. In response to this rise in the gun control movement, other organizations formed as well. For example, Gun Owners of America formed in 1974 by a former NRA board member. The Second Amendment Foundation was formed in 1976, and Jeff Cooper started IPSC in the interest of helping encourage self-defense training. And in this environment, some in the NRA decided that it was time to take a more decisive approach in defending Second Amendment rights. And so, in 1975, the NRA formed its Institute for Legislative Action. And in 1977, you had the famous revolt in Cincinnati, which completely changed the leadership from a more squishy old guard to the more robust pro-2A new guard. So in short, while gun control is correct in saying that the NRA changed its attitude towards politics in the 70s, it does not seem to recognize the role that its agitations in the 60s and the 70s played towards that change. And it's a lesson that gun control advocates do not seem to have learned. When their allies in the Democratic Party won both houses of Congress and the White House in the 1990s, they pushed for more laws and more regulations, including the assault weapons ban. The reaction? A marked increase in states passing shall issue concealed carry laws. The rise of the AR-15 as the most popular rifle in America. The establishment of the IDPA. The proliferation of guns in private ownership. And the Dems losing both houses of Congress, which they would not regain for another 12 years. Did gun control learn then?
No!
Because when Democrats, and let's face it, Democrats are the party of gun control, got the trifecta again in 2008 of House, Senate, and presidency, they amped up anti-gun rhetoric again. Only this time, they had Mike Bloomberg's dollars supporting high-profile organizations like Everytown and Moms Demand Action. Having promised the Brady campaign that he would work gun control under the radar, we saw Obama send his Secretary of State to sign the UN Small Arms Treaty. We saw him use his EPA to shut down the last large lead smelting operation in this country. And we saw his ATF attempt to ban the M855 556 round by bypassing its own criteria for armor-piercing ammunition. All the while, finger wagging at gun owners at every opportunity he could. The response was glorious. Numerous pro-2A rallies happened regularly nationwide. Constitutional carry was enacted in 11 states. Even Illinois became a shall-issue concealed carry state, at least on paper. Texas enacted legal open carry. Campus carry laws were passed. Concealed carry permits proliferated. The Dems lost control of both House and Senate again, as well in governorships and state legislatures, and record numbers of guns were sold, including this one, which I bought the very same day John Kerry signed the UN Small Arms Treaty. Gun control doesn't seem to understand that the harder it pushes for prohibitionism, the harder Americans who love their civil rights will push back to defend them. George Santayana is credited with the quote that says that those who refuse to learn from the past are doomed to repeat it, and gun control proves that observation true time and again.